Hello, and welcome back to my basement. Today we're going to be talking about Disney. What about Disney? Well, we will be talking about how much I love Disney. Their CEO, Bob Chapek, can truly do no wrong. Praise Bob Chapek. What were we talking about? Oh, right, Disney. And more specifically, how two different CEOs took extremely different courses of action while managing the Walt Disney Corporation, but how in the end, their actions weren't really that different after all. So, where should we start? I know. Michael Eisner.
Hello, Michael Eisner, head of the Walt Disney Company.
Picture this. The year, 1984. The day, the 24th of September. The AIDS epidemic is currently taking over America. The number one song on the Billboard Hot 100 that week is Let's Go Crazy by Prince. The top grossing movie of that week is All of Me starring Steve Martin. Speaking of movies, Disney was the number one company for movies, right? Well, actually no. Their most recent movie was The Fox and the Hound from 1981. It only grossed $63 million. And they were just about to release their biggest flop yet in 1985 with The Black Cauldron. They had no real market in live-action films, and they were primarily seen as a company for children. They were also on the verge of being taken over by other companies. This is where their saviors, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, swooped in. They helped save Disney from their fate. Into the 80s, they made the company well known again. On the animation front, Little Mermaid was released in 1989, making them the most well-known animation studio once again. They also expanded the live-action demographic and expanded outside the realm of children's content. More out-of-the-ordinary movies such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Nightmare Before Christmas also did well. They could not be stopped, and into the early 90s, they continued to shine. This would all come crashing down as Michael Eisner, the man who was originally seen as their savior, showed himself to be nothing more than a wolf in sheep's clothing.
After the massive success of Disney in the 1980s, Michael Eisner wanted to do something bigger and better for the 1990s. Many higher-ups at Disney were touting the 1990s as the Disney decade. This included new additions to the theme parks, like a new fourth gate at Disney World after the success of the third gate in 1989, and a second gate at Disneyland in Burbank, and even new overseas resorts in Europe. But theme parks weren't the only part of Disney's business that they tried to target during the Disney decade. Another part was their film business. After Little Mermaid in 1989, there was many other films in this style released in the 90s. A lot of these films are touted as being really good and a part of Disney's Renaissance era. But they also thought about buying the Muppets. Of course, these deals were cut short by Jim Henson's death, sadly. Things combined shows how much Michael Eisner actually helped Disney. However, all this would soon come crashing down. Welcome back to the Book Basement. I'm your host, and today we are going to be looking at a tale as old as time in this classic fable. That is, of course, the fable of the man who turned everything he touched into profit. I have my book of fables here, so let's get reading. In ancient Hollywood, roughly the 1990s, the ruler of the Walt Disney clan, a man we will refer to as King Eisner, he was known around the world for making everything that he even laid a finger on turn into profit. He saved an almost forgotten clan from obscurity. This was until the Euro Disney project. They thought that it would attract people from near and far to come to this area and spread the word of the Disney clan. But what seems like a good idea on paper is not always a good idea in practice. The locals in this area were unfamiliar with the Disney clan, so very few people came to the Euro Disney project. King Eisner was very upset by this. His shriek of turning things into profit was broken, and he became bitter. He became even more bitter when his second-in-command perished. He went mad with power, even though he had no idea how to turn things into profit anymore. Opening project after project, each one worse and more rushed than the last. New clans sprung up, and the name of Eisner began to fade. he was kicked out of his own clan and replaced with a new king. This classic fable is a sad story about how greed can ruin someone's livelihood. So thanks for watching, and tune in next time for more classic fables. Goodbye!
Only to discover he has a son, a very primitive son. Right, Tim?
In 2005, Michael Eisner stepped down as CEO after 43% of Disney shareholders decided against re-electing him. This is most likely due to Roy E. Disney, nephew of Walt, stepping down from his position as chairman of the company. He cited poor management of the film and theme park side of the company, saying that the company was becoming soulless. By this point, Eisner was opening theme park after theme park. Disneyland Paris in 93, Animal Kingdom in 98, California Adventure in 2001, Tokyo Disney Sea the same year, the year after he opened Walt Disney Studios Park, and Hong Kong Disneyland was opened in 2005. All of these parks, with the exception of Tokyo Disney Sea, suffered. The movie lineup also grew to be very underwhelming, with their films grossing less than their movies that were released during the Dark Age that Eisner saved them from. He also burnt bridges between them and Pixar, the only company that supplied Disney with high-grossing animated features in the early 2000s. Instead, Eisner opted to release cheap direct-to-video sequels to the classics that Pixar made. Speaking of cheap direct-to-DVD sequels, after the Little Mermaid television show was shown to be successful, Disney greenlit a new Aladdin television series. Originally, it was supposed to premiere with a 1-hour-long special episode, but Tad Stones thought it would be a better idea to release it directly to home video. This was an idea that was practically unheard of at the time, and there was a lot of pushback. But eventually, in May of 1994, the film was finally released as Aladdin: The Return of Jafar. It was a smash hit instantly, and Disney decided to greenlight film after film that were just cheap direct-to-video sequels of Disney classics and new Disney Renaissance films. This reuse of properties, both new and old, broke the floodgates of originality wide open. These floodgates are ones that would never be closed and still remain open to this very day.
Don't waste your time. Maybe it sounds a bit harsh, but that's just who he was. But he also had severe depression.
After the previous CEO stepped down from the company, a new CEO was necessary for business operations to continue. This CEO needed to not only be a good CEO in general, but also fix the problems that Michael Eisner caused towards the end of his run. So, the person that was picked was Bob Iger, was president and CEO of the Walt Disney Company since the year 2000. Once Mr. Iger stepped up as CEO in September of 2005, there was many things that he felt obliged to do. The first thing he did was repair the bridge that Eisner broke down between Disney and Pixar. He continued to buy up other properties, such as Marvel Entertainment in 2009 and Lucasfilm in 2011. The purchase of Lucasfilm gave him both Star Wars and Indiana Jones's properties, both huge properties which Disney could make a lot of money off of, which they did for Star Wars. And then, in 2019, Mr. Iger made his biggest purchase yet. For a staggering $71.3 billion, he bought 20th Century Fox.
Other than purchases of different properties, Iger made plans to renovate several theme parks around the world, including Walt Disney Studios, Hong Kong Disneyland, California Adventure, and Epcot. Many of these renovations have already taken place, and they have improved the parks. He also opened one new park in 2016, known as Shanghai Disneyland. Under his leadership, the Marvel franchise continued to grow bigger, and a new line of 5 Star Wars movies were created. Also, many new popular animated features, such as Frozen and Tangled, were created under his leadership. Disney remakes also became increasingly prevalent, making Disney a heck of a lot of money. Now you know about both Iger and Eisner, and how they both took different approaches in managing the company. If you recall, I said at the beginning of this video, they weren't so different after all. But how can this be? Well, let me introduce you to an idea I mentioned earlier.
We could practice raising our hands.
See, that was
How
awkward.
would we do that?
No, that was awkward.
Earlier I talked about how Roy E. Disney criticized Michael Eisner for turning Disney into a soulless company. I take this to mean that Roy E. Disney thought that the Walt Disney Corporation was becoming much too unoriginal. I believe this is definitely true at the time, with sequel after sequel and TV show after TV show coming out and trying to capitalize on the newest Disney movie. As well as this, there was theme park after theme park opening all across the world year after year without rhyme or reason. I do think that Iger is just as guilty of this as Eisner was, with Marvel movie after Marvel movie being churned out, each one being very similar in content, with Disney remake after Disney remake being churned out, each one being very similar in quality, and inconsistent Star Wars movies being churned out every single year without fail. So how is it that Roy E. Disney criticized Eisner, but actually supported Iger a lot? And he said that Iger returned Disney back to their former magic. Well, we know it's not true that Iger stopped the unoriginality flood. So what happened? Well, although Eisner and Iger were both very, very, very similar in how much unoriginality they churned out, they both took two very different approaches to the unoriginality.
You see, Eisner did the same thing over and over and over again. This thing that he did never really worked. It only worked for him once or twice, but he kept doing it over and over and expecting different results. Even when these things that he was doing made no sense and no money. No one wanted it, and no one paid for it. Iger was constantly doing what worked. When something didn't work, he would try something else. He wanted to please the shareholders and the fans. When people think about these two characters, they see one that's good and one that's bad. In the end, they did the same thing. They were both unoriginal and both had soulless business practices. It's just that one did what he thought would make money and would please people. The other did what he wanted regardless of how much money it would make or how much it would please people. They were just two extremely different approaches to the exact same business practice.
Do you want to know who is really great? Bob Chapek.